Over 80,000 coins minted in Baghdad have been dug up in Sweden. Not dozens, not hundreds. 80,000. These are silver dirhams, currency of the Abbasid Caliphate, the Islamic empire centered in Baghdad, one of the wealthiest states the medieval world ever produced. And they ended up buried across Scandinavian soil because of a trade network that reshapes everything you think you know about who the Vikings really were. To understand those coins, we need to understand why Vikings traded at all. Right? Here's the core thesis. Vikings were strategic opportunists, not mindless raiders. In the West, England, France, Ireland, they faced fragmented kingdoms, dotted with rich, undefended monasteries, easy targets they raided. But when Swedish Vikings looked east, they encountered the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate, centralized powers with massive professional armies and well-defended borders, far too strong to attack. So the very same people who plundered monasteries in England negotiated trade agreements in Constantinople. Think of it as a decision matrix. West, fragmented political landscape, wealthy but poorly defended targets, minimal military risk. Outcome, raid. East, unified empires, sophisticated administrations, overwhelming military force, but enormous appetite for goods the Vikings could supply. Outcome, trade. Same Vikings, different strategy. The variable wasn't Viking character. It was the strength of whoever stood across from them. Raiding the weak and trading with the strong is pragmatic intelligence, not contradiction. The physical routes ran through Russia's river systems, starting from Birka in Sweden, across the Baltic Sea, into the Gulf of Finland. The paths forked. Route 1 followed the Dnieper, a major river cutting south through modern Ukraine, down to the Black Sea and onto Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire. Route 2 followed the Volga, Russia's longest river, south to the Caspian Sea, then overland toward Baghdad. Key staging cities included Novgorod and Kiev. These waterways weren't obstacles. They were commercial highways connecting Baltic trading posts directly to the two richest markets in the medieval world. The goods flowing south tell a harsh story. The Vikings' dominant exports were slaves, predominantly captured Slavic peoples sold into domestic service and manual labor, and furs, sable, marten, mink from the forests of northern Russia. They also shipped walrus ivory, Baltic amber, honey, wax, hunting falcons, swords, and arrows. Flowing north in return, silver dirhams, the coins we started with, along with silk, spices, glassware, and jewelry. First in Baghdad might sound strange, but the Caliphate controlled Afghanistan and eastern Iran, cold, mountainous territory where fur had practical value. And among the wealthy everywhere, prestige goods transcend climate. Fur meant status, not just warmth. So the routes existed and the goods flowed, and the evidence is overwhelming. Start with those 80,000 Abbasid dirhams. This isn't one buried treasure chest. It's thousands of separate finds scattered across Swedish archaeological sites, dating from the 8th through 10th centuries, roughly 200 years of sustained, high-volume commerce. The distribution pattern is decisive, coins turning up at site after site, generation after generation, not concentrated in a single hoard, spread across the landscape. This wasn't one lucky expedition. It was a commercial system operating at enormous scale. These dirhams form one of the most remarkable bodies of numismatic evidence for any medieval trade network. Then there are the written sources. Muslim travelers documented Viking customs in extraordinary detail. Ahmad ibn Fadlan, writing around 921 CE, described their appearance, rituals, hygiene, or striking lack of it, and elaborate funeral practices. These accounts rank among the most vivid primary sources about the Vikings in existence, written by outsiders with no reason to glorify them. Where the coins prove the scale of trade, these texts reveal the human reality behind it. One geographic insight ties everything together. On a standard Mercator projection, the flat map most of us grew up with, Scandinavia looks remote, stuck at the top of Europe, far from everything, but switch to a polar projection centered on the North Pole and the picture transforms. Scandinavia sits at a crossroads, British Isles to the west, Russian river systems to the east, the North Atlantic toward Iceland and Greenland to the northwest. Norway shares a land border with Russia. Its northernmost point lies roughly 30 miles from Murmansk. The Gulf Stream keeps Norwegian coasts temperate, keeping Viking ports navigable. Scandinavia wasn't a dead end. It was a hub. One reality demands direct acknowledgement. The slave trade wasn't peripheral to Viking Eastern commerce. It was central to the entire system. The very word slave likely derives from Slav, a linguistic fossil of this history. Vikings didn't invent slavery, but they were efficient, systematic practitioners. Constantinople and Baghdad maintained enormous, constant demand for human labor and domestic service, and the Vikings met that demand generation after generation. Step back from the details and the bigger picture emerges. The Viking Age wasn't a story of barbarism versus civilization. It was a story of pragmatic adaptation. The same people who burned Lindisfarne negotiated exchange rates with Byzantine merchants, raider and merchant, destroyer and connector. That duality is what makes the Vikings historically significant. They didn't just plunder, they built networks that move goods, people, ideas, and currency across a vast stretch of the medieval world. The next time you see a Viking helmet on screen, remember, the man wearing it might just as easily have been calculating silver prices in a Baghdad market as swinging an axe on an English beach.